American English, American English, American English webinar series. Teach and learn. American English webinar series.
Welcome everyone to the 5th webinar in American English Webinar Series 7, brought to you by the American English team at the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C. Let's begin today with this great photo submitted by Alexei Nasayev that shows teachers from Uralsk, Kazakhstan preparing to participate in American English Webinar 7.4. We love to see teachers learning together, so please share your webinar viewing photos by emailing them to americanenglishwebinars@elprograms.org. We may feature them in the next webinar. I'm Lauren Whitaker, part of the American English Webinar team, also known as Moderator Lauren. You'll also see Moderator Robert in the chat box here to help you during the webinar. We'll be here to assist you as you participate during the webinar series. Here you can see the Series 7 schedule. Our next session is in 2 weeks on November 15th and will be Cross-Cultural Competence in Business English with Lisa Mann. Please note that there will be a time change in the United States on, on November 5th from Daylight Savings Time to Standard Time. This 1-hour change may affect your local time for webinar 7.6 on November 15th. Webinars will take place at 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our webinars are each 60 minutes long, and webinars are often related to a theme found on the American English website. The Teacher's Corner section from the website shown here features resources and lesson ideas related to the month's topic. The way for you to participate is by typing in the chat box, where you can ask questions or make comments related to today's topic. We may not be able to answer every question during the session, as there are often hundreds of teachers participating. However, there is another place to ask questions after the session is over: the Ning Community for Teachers, which we'll look at in more detail momentarily. The presenter will also ask you poll questions. These multiple choice and multiple answer questions will appear on the screen for you to answer. Unfortunately, some people may experience technical problems during the webinar. We will let you know if we are having a global problem. If you do lose sound, you can follow along with the caption pod at the bottom of the screen if refreshing your browser doesn't correct the problem. Each webinar series consists of 6 webinars. During the series, webinars take place every other Wednesday. Participants who attend at least 4 out of 6 webinars receive an e-certificate from the Regional English Language Office or local U.S. Embassy after the series ends. To ensure you are eligible for the e-certificate, we will ask you to submit your attendance at the very end of the webinar. At the end of the webinar, you will click on the internet link we provide so that you can submit the requested attendance information. We hope many of you are already Ning community members, but if you haven't registered yet, please do join us. It may take up to 72 hours for your Ning registration to be approved. Here you can find resources and discussion questions related to each webinar, as well as all of the webinar recordings and featured materials from past sessions. The Ning is also where you can ask presenter questions after the webinar and live chat with your fellow community members. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to join American English for Educators Live on November 2nd to learn about how to use digital storytelling techniques to promote student engagement in language learning. Come with your questions. And now for today's webinar, Understanding Documentation and Draft Writing for Business English. Business writing presents unique challenges for EFL instructors and language learners alike. Considering context, content, and tone can help make business-related draft writing processes more effective and enjoyable for both writers and readers. This webinar addresses the range of documents draft writers often require, as well as the planning tools, such as outlines and preparatory questions that effective business writers need. It is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Ben Taylor. Ben is a TESOL professor from O'Fallon, Illinois. He is currently serving as a U.S. Department of State English Language Fellow at Karaganda Technical University in Kazakhstan. Previously, he served as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Federated States of Micronesia. His international teaching experience has led him to research interests that include creative speaking and writing activities and blended lesson planning. Ben has a master's degree in ESL/EFL from Humboldt State University. Welcome.
All right. Hello from Kazakhstan, or Salametsizve, as we'd say here, everybody. Thank you, Lauren, for that lovely introduction. We've got a lot of information that we're going to cover today, so let's get started. I'd like to start by having a look at some of the results of the poll that we had. So the questions were, the first one, which of the following skills are important for business writers? We had a pretty decent mix of answers on this. A lot of people selected mostly clear and focused writing as being a very important quality of business writing. But we did have responses for understanding your audience, using active versus passive language, and the importance of making persuasive arguments. So actually, as we'll see, developing clear and focused writing, using concise and simple language, using active instead of passive sentence structures, and making persuasive arguments are all important aspects of good business writing. And with the second question, which forms of business writing are you familiar with? Again, a pretty good mix. A lot of people are familiar with circular emails and letters. And then we also had a few people who were familiar with meeting minutes. Some people said proposals. And then 4% of the people who took part in our poll selected other. So I just want to say, we're going to cover all of these different aspects of business writing today, but if you selected other, go ahead and write your idea in the chat box now. Yeah, I'm seeing a little bit more circular letters, invitations, good. Okay, we've got some interesting stuff here, directives, good. So there's a wide range of business writing. We'll talk about some of these main groups today. Thanks, everybody. So what are we going to do today? Well, as Lauren said, we're looking at the basic elements of good business writing. So to start, we're going to address a range of documents business writers often require. This includes the assignments from the pre-discussion poll question that we just looked at. We're also going to need to build an understanding of the qualities of effective business writing. And after this, we'll focus on the purpose of your writing, the context of your work, the need to find an appropriate tone in your writing, researching your topic to make your writing stronger, and organizing all those great thoughts you'll have by using an outline. I just want to remind everybody that if you have any questions or want to share your ideas about this topic after the presentation, I would love to see you on the Ning for our post-webinar discussion. I'll have a link to that discussion ready for you at the end of this presentation. So, to start out here, what is documentation? That's part of the title of this presentation, after all. Well, in business writing, it's often very important to keep a record of important communications. This is so people who weren't at a meeting or involved in a plan can catch up with everyone else. And it's also so we can take our business plans to the next stage. Examples of documents we would use for documentation are meeting minutes, circular emails, and proposals. So now that we understand documentation, let's learn a little about drafts. A draft is basically a version of your writing. If you're finishing a task for the first time and plan to edit it later, you could call it a rough draft. You might also hear the phrase final draft for a piece of writing that has been edited and is ready to be sent to its audience. For every kind of draft, some things are the same. For example, all draft writing should have a purpose, carefully consider the audience of readers, and use an appropriate tone for that audience. We'll also want to do research so that the content of our writing is strong. Our organization can be helped by use of an outline. Now, I'd like you to raise your hand if you've ever used an outline before for a writing assignment. All right. Okay, I'm seeing all sorts of hands going up. That's great. We'll get to outlining at the end of this presentation. So thank you very much for those hands. You can put them down for now. As I've said, we'll cover the 3 basic types of business writing today: meeting minutes, circular emails, and proposals. Let's start with meeting minutes. So that's the first type that we're going to look at today. These are basically very brief notes that remind us what happened in a meeting. Now, usually, one person at each meeting will be selected to write these notes. They're good for catching other team members up if they missed a meeting. They're also good for informing other interested people of our meeting and helping future groups repeat the process we're using. So if you want to inform some other business that might be interested in what you're doing of your activities, meeting minutes are a great way to keep them informed. Now, meeting minutes don't have to be complete sentences, but they should record the names of the people who attended a meeting, what was discussed, and any plans you might have for future meetings. I'd like you to raise your hand again if you've ever written meeting minutes before. All right, I'm seeing some hands go up. If your hands are up right now, go ahead and write in the chat box what that meeting was about. Okay, teaching. That's a teacher's workshop, a social product. Let's see, faculty meeting. Great. Good. All right, all sorts of different meetings, international school meetings. Just a huge number of answers here. This is wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. You can put those hands down, but it looks like a lot of us are familiar with meeting minutes. We've got a faculty meeting here. This is great. Good. So let's go ahead and we'll look at an example of a meeting minute now. Okay. So here we've got an example of what meeting minutes could look like. We've got a date at the top and the time of the meeting, as well as the name of the person who's called the meeting. So that's the person who's called the meeting. In this case, it's the organizer of the meeting. It happens to be me for this one. We've got the subject or topic here, which is getting use of a conference room to watch webinars. And I've got my attendance of this meeting named as well. I've got Lauren, Kate, and Tim. Then we see some basic notes of what each person said at the meeting, including any questions people asked and our future plans. We can also see that the time and date of the next meeting is written here. Now, usually, these meetings would go out to team members, including those who couldn't attend. Hopefully, you can see how useful this would be. All right. Now that we've looked at meeting minutes, we can talk about our next business document, circular letters and emails. Now, in the poll, a lot of people seemed familiar with circular letters and emails, so this is great. Okay. These are also known as just circulars. Businesses and other organizations write these all the time to their customers. In fact, if you use your email account often, you've probably gotten a few this week. Companies will regularly write these for their entire staff too. So, in every case, circulars are written for a large audience or shared publicly. Now, as teachers, a circular letter could be a letter to all the teachers at our workplace, our students, parents, or maybe an email to the Board of Education in our country. Circulars are good for promoting new events or changes. They should be short, polite, and personal, with frequent use of the word you. We want to focus on the reader in circular letters. So, here's an example of a circular now. This is one that I've written to promote today's webinar. You can see that I've kept it short, but included important information. For example, I've got the webinar topic here. I've got the cost, which happens to be free. It's always good. And I've got when to state interest by. Now, I think when we are interested in this webinar, when we should say that we're interested is especially important information, so I've made that in bold font to really draw the reader's attention. Also notice that I'm using words like dear, you, and sincerely. Okay, I've got a message here from Uralsk teachers that in other ESL schools, circulars were used to promote a trip to Australia or summer school. That's fabulous. So they can be used for many, many things, including this webinar, right? Great. It's what I'm doing here with this language, it's being written in a very personal style. So now in the chat box, I'd like you to tell me, have you ever written a circular before, like our friends from Uralsk? And if you have, who was it for? All right, so for teachers, colleagues, coworkers, great. Yeah, these are the kind of circulars that will go out regularly. Employees, if we work somewhere, absolutely. Okay, excellent. So these are all parents of students. This goes out often, especially if you'll be doing like a field trip somewhere or something like that. You might have to send out a circular. So thank you very much. These are fabulous, fabulous answers. All right. Now the third kind, so we've looked at meeting minutes, we've looked at circulars. The third kind of document we'll be talking about today are proposals. So there are other words we can add to the front of this to give more specific information. You might hear about project proposals or grant proposals, for instance. Proposals are used to persuade a reader of something, whether it's to invest time or money in a project or to otherwise support a new idea. Now, notice with proposals that we want to convince someone of something. So when we write them, we must carefully consider our audience and the tone we'd like to use when talking to them. Proposals also benefit from research and effective use of content information. We'll talk about all of these things more later in this presentation. Let's look at an example of a proposal that I've written. So here I'm writing to the director of my school, asking him if it's okay for me to use the school's conference room to show a webinar. I'd like you to notice the polite tone of my proposal. I start out by saying, I hope you are well, right? The information that I'm including, that includes the time, the date of the webinar, right? When I would need this conference room. And the emphasis that I'm putting on the benefits of webinars for our teachers. I'm mentioning that they're free to use, they're accessible from anywhere, they're fun for our teachers. I'm trying to persuade or convince Director Collins that this is a good idea. Okay, so I think we're going to We're going to stop now with the PowerPoint. We're going to move to an activity I'd like you to try. We're going to see if we can figure out which one of the document types we're looking at here. So I'll give you about a minute to read this short piece of writing. Then write your answers in the chat box. And there's a poll right here as well. So. All right, seeing a lot of different answers. Yeah, this is good. Kind of reading through. We've got some people saying proposal. A lot of people are saying that this is probably a circular email. Thank you very much for all of these responses. I'm really liking that I'm seeing so many people say that this is a circular because that's right. So let's look at why. Here we see the use of polite, personal phrasing like dear, valued customer, right? And valuable information like the dates of a new office opening and the name of the new manager. Great job, everybody. Thank you very much. Let's go back to the PowerPoint now. So now that we've seen some of the basic types of business writing, let's talk about the qualities of effective business writing. All good business writing, if you're doing meeting minutes, if you're doing proposals, if you're doing circulars, they're all going to demonstrate persuasive, clear, active voice written in a concise style. So we're going to talk about each of these qualities in the following slides. Business writing is often persuasive writing. If something is persuasive, it means that we're trying to convince our readers of some point. This means we need to figure out what it is that we are selling. Now you might say, oh, I'm not selling anything. I don't work in a store, but we have some idea that we want to convince other people of, right? We need to figure out what it is that we're selling. Okay, so we might be trying to sell a product, or perhaps convince our work supervisors to hold a professional development conference at our school, or that we should host webinars and teacher training workshops at our school. In every case, we need to offer some kind of timeline and set realistic goals for our project. We're also going to want to focus on the benefits of this project for the people we want to help, but also for the audience reading our proposal. In the chat box now, I'd like you to write some other ideas for me. What are some other things we might want to persuade someone of in a business proposal? All right, seeing a couple different answers. It's difficult to persuade others. That's true, but I think if we focus with business writing, if we focus on some of these techniques, we are going to have success. Right? Selling something, okay, concrete goals, good. Products, this is very good. Okay. So there's a lot of things we might try to sell. Digitalizing, okay, that's from American Center Mail. Thank you very much. Investments, another great thing we might try to sell. Good. We do want to focus on benefits, certainly, objectives, providing training. These are all fabulous ideas. Thank you, everybody. And there's many, many more things we could try to persuade someone of in business writing. Oh, all right. So let's look back at that proposal that I used for an example several slides ago. It's the same proposal that we looked at earlier, but here I've marked with bold font the parts of this proposal that are particularly important for us. So firstly, it is important to state what we're hoping to get from our supervisor. So in this case, we would like use of the school's conference room so that we can screen a webinar for our teachers. I've also marked a timeline for this project. We're going to need to use the room on November 1st. And last, I want to remind everyone, we want to focus on benefits when we write a proposal. So that's what I'm trying to do in this final sentence when I say that it is a fantastic resource for our colleagues in the department. I had a lovely comment in the pre-webinar discussion about use of adjectives when doing proposals, that we really want to make our ideas attractive to somebody. I think that's a great idea. That's kind of what I'm doing with the word fantastic here. So, thank you to that commenter. All right. So, because we want to persuade a reader of something in our writing, we don't want to make them guess at our meaning by using confusing phrases and sentence structures. Good business writing is always going to be clear writing. This means that we want to include all relevant information, the dates, the costs, the benefits of something, in a way that is easy for the reader to understand. We should also avoid vague and unclear phrasing. So the example here illustrates what I'm saying. If we look at both of these sentences and I ask you which one of these contains the necessary information for attending our professional development webinar, the clear sentence is much better. There we've got the date, we've got the time, we've got the subject that we'll be covering for today's topic. On that unclear statement, there's kind of, it's a nice feeling. We're going to be learning more about teaching, but we don't really know what we'll be learning about teaching or where we should go or when. So the clear sentence is what we should be focused on. Okay. In addition to being persuasive and clear, good business writing will use an active voice. So when we talk about voice, we're talking about phrasing. The information in both of these examples is the same, but one sentence, the active sentence, focuses more on the doer. Sometimes passive voice can be very useful as well, like in academic writing. But in business writing, we actually want to focus on the active voice much more often. Look at the difference between the active and passive voice in the examples here. If we want to focus on our audience and on benefits, we're going to want to put those people or ideas at the front of our sentences, not at the end of them. And last, we want our business writing to be concise. So remember that if we want to convince someone of something, we might only have a very short time to do this, especially if it's a very important person. They might be very busy. Right? We don't want to waste their time. So we should get right to the point of our writing. This means we want to focus on the main idea, on our desired outcome right away. In business writing, simple, short sentences are better than long, overly wordy ones. This came up a lot in the pre-webinar discussion as well. So look at the examples here and see what I mean. If we notice in the shorter answer, we've still got all the necessary information that we would want to share with our audience. We have the date, we have what we'll be talking about, and where we'll go, right? That's what we really need. So now that we know business writing should be persuasive, clear, active, and concise, we should look at the various qualities good business writing considers. We need to think about the purpose of our writing, the context of our writing assignment, what research we'll need to do to strengthen our writing, how to organize our thoughts in an outline, and what specific content we would like to add to our writing. Let's start by talking about the purpose of our writing. There are as many purposes for writing as there are writing assignments. But we can put all these different goals into 4 basic groups. Some writing tasks need us to summarize something. Sometimes we're asked to do an analysis of something instead. When we have more than one source that we're using, we're often asked to synthesize them in a piece of writing. And finally, there are some tasks that ask us to do an evaluation of something. We're going to look at each of these purposes in detail in the next few slides. So the first purpose we'll look at is summarizing. Raise your hands if you've ever written a summary before. All right, seeing some great hands here. Keep those hands up if you've ever assigned summaries to your students. Great, lots of hands still. That's wonderful. You can put your hands down now. It seems that many of us know about summaries already. So a summary is when we take a longer piece of writing or a video or something else, anything really, and we write about using several sentences or maybe a paragraph. Sharing the plot of a book or movie with a friend or writing the minutes from a business meeting are some examples of summaries we might do. Another example of a summary would be something like this conversation I could have with Lauren. Lauren introduced me, by the way. So maybe Lauren would say, "Hey, Ben, I missed American English Webinar 7.5. Can you tell me what it was about?" And of course, I would say, "Sure. I talked about the basics of business writing, which includes finding the purpose for your writing and choosing an appropriate tone to use for your audience, as well as outlining." Hopefully, Lauren would say, "Oh, great. I'll check it out on the NING." Now, in the chat box, please write another example of something that you could summarize. I'll be looking at your answers here. What is something else you could summarize? An event, a film review, okay, business plans, biographies, great. Good, sports, maybe a sporting event, excellent stuff. Novels. Okay, so I've got story here. This is great. Thank you so much. Articles, great stuff. This is wonderful. Thank you, everybody. There are many, many different things that we can summarize. That's wonderful. Oh, sorry about that. So here's a written example of what a summary could look like. If it looks familiar, that's because these are actually the meeting minutes from our slide several slides ago, but they're written out as a paragraph. I'd like you to notice that all the important points from these meeting minutes are included here in a concise, clear, and active paragraph. All right. The next purpose we need to consider is an analysis. Analytic tasks are common for teachers and for students, but they can be a little more complicated than summaries. An analysis takes several parts of something and looks at how they interact and connect to each other. We can find many examples of this in the writing of movie, book, music, and art critics. For example, it was just Halloween in America. It's a very popular holiday. So maybe an analysis of a scary movie could discuss how the lighting and the music came together to create a feeling of fear for the viewer. Explaining why webinars are practical for teachers with access to the internet would be another example of an analytic task. We should remember that an analysis doesn't offer an opinion about whether something is good or bad or why we like or dislike that thing. Rather, it explains why something works the way that it does. So, in the chat box, give me some of your ideas. What are some other things that we could analyze? All right, plant anatomy, textbooks, a test, music. I love analyzing music personally. Climate, projects, the news, a poem. These are beautiful ideas. Many, many things we could analyze. A chart, a graph possibly. These are great ideas. Thank you so much, everybody. So I've got here an example of what an analytical piece of writing could look like. Now, I'm still talking about the benefits of webinars here, but rather than giving my own opinions, I'm delivering facts. I'm trying to focus on facts, the cost of webinars, their availability, and other things. Okay. The next purpose we're going to discuss is a little bit more complicated than an analysis. So, in a synthesis, we might take 2 or more pieces of writing or other sources like movies, music, speeches, anything really, and we bring those multiple sources together to make our own original or unique point. An example of this that relates to our assignment would be to talk about the value of webinars by explaining 2 articles which show the benefits of webinar use in Mexico and Kazakhstan to make the point that webinars are useful for teachers in different parts of the world. So, now that we're familiar with this purpose, let's go back to the chat box and give an example of something that we could do as a synthesis task. Thank you, Izumi Tanaka. I like this illustration too. I think it shows that synthesis is bringing things together. Cellular connection, historical events, good, diagrams, possibly we're bringing these different things together to make some kind of point. Good. All right, abstracts, connection between languages, that's a fabulous idea. Thank you, everybody. These are great things to synthesize. The news, okay, good, 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 good. These are all good synthesis tasks, okay? Here's an example of a written example of what a synthesis paragraph could look like for our assignment. So notice that I'm bringing together 2 different sources here, okay? I've got a report from the Department of Technology, and then I've also got some websites for libraries. Okay, and what I'm doing is I'm bringing these sources together to make the point that Wi-Fi access for webinars should not be a problem for our teachers. This kind of writing can be very convincing, and it requires some good research to be effective. Don't worry, we're going to talk about research a little bit more in a few slides. Now, the last and most complex purpose for writing is to evaluate something. So unlike the other purposes we've just discussed, an evaluation offers an opinion and then gives reasons for that opinion. So reviews of books, films, music, and other art forms are usually evaluations. But more importantly for us, proposals in business writing are usually evaluations as well. So let's look at an example of an evaluation assignment. It involves the same situation we've been considering about using the conference room to show a webinar to teachers. I'd like you to notice what I've bolded here. I've got the benefits of webinars are much greater. That right there is my opinion, right? So I need to share that with my reader. Remember, evaluations state an opinion, and evaluations are persuasive, as we've learned business writing often is. So now I'd like you to try doing this for yourself. Let's read the assignment stated here, and then think about what your purpose for writing this paper is. Put some ideas in the chat box when you're ready. What kind of purpose do we have here? Okay, the benefits of webinars, the large topic. Yes, good. So here's our assignment. What kind of purpose would this assignment have? Okay, academic benefits. Is this a summary? Is it an analysis? Is it a synthesis? Is this going to be an evaluation? Okay, I've got one person saying evaluation. Let's see. Educational, another evaluation, more people saying that. A synthesis. Okay, so this, if we look here, I think that we can say that this is an evaluation. What are we evaluating? This is an evaluation. What are we evaluating? Educational evaluation. We're evaluating, let's see, what are we evaluating? Okay, professional development possibly. I think we might be evaluating the value of webinars. We might be evaluating whether or not webinars are a good thing to use for our teachers, right? So here's some ideas I had. We could evaluate the benefits of educational webinars and develop an argument for the use of educational webinars in teacher training. Okay? Many of the answers that you were sharing are also great. Now, I'd like to pull out of the PowerPoint for a second and try identifying the purpose of this piece of writing. So we've got another activity here. You've got your choices here. What is the general purpose of this piece of writing? So here comes the slide. Okay. Got a message to the director. All right. Okay, good, good, good. Lots of answers here. A lot of people saying summarize. People saying it's to evaluate. So some people saying it's maybe to synthesize, possibly to analyze. Okay. So this is some kind of letter to our director. I'd like to point everybody to where it says that we're going to share the many benefits of webinars as teacher training resources, right? And it says, I hope you will agree that the conference room is a great space to hold our training. This is probably an evaluation. Our opinion is that webinars have value and that we need to convince our director that the webinar is valuable so we can use the conference room. Thank you, everybody, for your responses. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right. So, once we know the purpose of our writing task, we need to consider the audience that'll be reading this and what tone we should use with that audience. Depending on your audience, your tone can be very different from one piece of writing to the next. We're actually going to stop again now to answer a poll question. I'd like to ask you a question. Which of the following qualities of your audience are important things to consider? Should we be thinking about demographics? That's the age, religion, gender, ethnicity of your audience, maybe other things, level of education, prior knowledge, or expectations. You can choose as many of these as you want. So if you think 2 or 3 of those are correct, go ahead. I'll wait just a moment. I'm seeing kind of a mix of answers here. Looks like a lot of people saying demographics are very important, education, but I've got responses on all 4 of these. That's great. So let's learn which of these qualities are important when we think about our audience. Let's go back to the PowerPoint now. We've got a nice mix here. So actually, every one of these responses from our poll are important to consider when thinking about our audience. So if you selected every option, great job. The demographics of your audience, that's their age, religions, genders, and ethnicities, can be very important in some pieces of writing. I might use a different tone for a book review that will be read by a group of older religious leaders, for example, than I would for a group of young school children. Similarly, your audience's level of education is important to remember. If your writing is below their level of education, your readers might feel insulted, and if it's above their level of education, they could feel lost or confused. The background knowledge of your audience, what they already know, is important too. We can use what they know already to make our writing clearer and we should make sure to always explain new ideas that are not part of an audience's background information so they won't be lost. Last, your audience's expectations are important to remember. What do they want to get out of your writing? And just as importantly, what do you hope to get out of them? So now, I'd actually like to pull out one more time. We've got one more activity here. We're going to think about this and try it ourselves. I want you to consider the demographics, level of education, prior knowledge, and expectations of the following groups. So we've got, let's see, we've got our audience types here. Oh, sorry. Oh, I shouldn't. Okay. Here we go. So we've got our department coworkers. That's their level of education, their prior knowledge, their expectations. What are some ideas there that we might have? We're looking for some characteristics of your department coworkers. What kind of education? So education similar to ours, absolutely. University graduates. They probably have similar expectations to us. High education, yes. They have a lot of prior knowledge about what we're doing. These are great responses. Yes, good, good, good. Okay, good. Let's move on. Let's move on to our next group. Now we're talking about your supervisors. These are your supervisors, maybe at your university or the school where you work. So level of education, they're very experienced. They have a high level of education, prior knowledge, lots of education. They have maybe a background in management. Okay, these are great answers. Very high expectations of us. Possibly a different field of study. That's a very good point. Okay, excellent. And then our students. That'll be our last group, right? So our students, let's see. Maybe they have a good education. They might have a slightly lower education than us, level of education. They're good at using technology. That's probably a very good point. Lots of prior knowledge. We might not be too sure about everything about them yet, but they probably have expectations for their future, right? So it's very important, no matter who we are considering, to be thinking about what kinds of audience it is that we are talking to or writing to. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you, everyone, very much for your feedback. So, usually, once we've got our audience established, we know our purpose, we know our audience, we need to think about the tone. So when we talk about tone in music, we're often talking about the sound of something, like that wonderful music we heard at the beginning of this webinar, right? In writing, tone indicates a writer's attitude towards the audience as well as the subject matter of the writing. So for instance, written communication can be very casual between friends, but would probably be much more formal between yourself and a supervisor or maybe a work partner. Okay, OWL Purdue, that's the online writing lab. It's a great resource that I've actually linked to on the name. Recommends considering the following 3 questions when determining your tone. The first one is, why am I writing this document? Then we want to ask, who am I writing to? And what do I want them to understand? And finally, we should ask, what kind of tone should I use? All right. So, we should consider the important qualities of tone for a moment, right? We want our writing to be sure of itself, honest and polite, of course. Our writing should be non-discriminatory, which means it won't speak badly of anyone who's different from us. We also should recognize when we're writing to someone who's in a higher position, professionally, or maybe because of age or some other quality than us. And we want to focus more on statements that are directed to the audience than statements about ourselves. And finally, we want to write material that our readers can follow and understand at a good pace. All right, so let's use the example I introduced earlier in this discussion to practice identifying audience and tone. Now, my assignment is still to explain the reasons why educational webinars are an effective tool for teacher training worldwide. Also, my purpose is still to evaluate the benefits of educational webinars and make an argument for the use of educational webinars in teacher training around the world. Now, who is my audience? Well, in this case, there we go. Now, sorry about that, everybody. Who's my audience? In this case, my audience is my supervisor, who's a second language English teacher. So, in the chat box, if we have these things to consider, we should maybe write for a second, what are some good ideas for what a tone could be for this assignment? Okay, polite, definitely want to be polite here. Getting a lot of people say polite, very formal, good. These are the right answers, right? We want to be writing to a teacher, okay, good. Respectful, these are great words. Confident, all good answers. Thank you very much. Honest, very, very good ideas here. Thank you, everybody. Let's see, polite, respectful, focused, a great word. Thank you, everyone. I think we have a good handle on what tone is, right? Good. So, we had some great stuff in the chat box. Here's some suggestions I have for tone, right? We should focus on language that can create an open and comfortable space for teacher training, avoid using too many idioms or difficult English phrases, and show respect for our supervisor's position at the school. If we do these things, he or she will be more open to our business proposal. So, now that we know our purpose, we've used the context of our writing to find a good tone, it's time to do some research for our proposal so that we can make our arguments more persuasive. Some of the questions we might want to answer with our research are, what would someone who disagrees with me say? How can I provide evidence to strengthen my claims? And have any important speakers, scientists, thinkers, or politicians discussed this topic before? If so, what did they say? Raise your hand if you've ever done any research for a writing assignment before. All right, great. I'm seeing some great hands here. Looks like a lot of us have done research. Okay, you can put your hands down. Thank you very much, everybody. I've got an example quote from an article about the benefits of webinars. So this article is taken from the English Teaching Forum. It's a great teaching resource offered by American English. I'll have a link to it on the name. We can see how this quote will strengthen my opinion that webinars are valuable as educational resources. I would also try to find some other quotes from a variety of sources to strengthen my proposal. All right. Let's see. I'd like to go, I have maybe one more poll. Now that we've done a little bit of working with research, I do have one more poll question I'd like to ask you. So let's go to the polls for a second. How do you teach students to prepare writing assignments? Oh, sorry about that. Why don't you write for me in your chat box, what can you do to prepare students for writing assignments? Let's see, seeing a couple different ideas. Outlining, that's good. We can motivate people. We can brainstorm, activate, vocabulary. These are great ideas. Get feedback, wonderful stuff. Okay, thank you very much. Good. So I think outlining is a great thing to do. Outlines can help us keep track of a large amount of information, and they can show a relationship between information as well as a logical ordering of information. Okay, so how do we create an outline? Well, the first thing we want to do, I love seeing on the comments on the chat box here, some ideas like brainstorming, because that is something we want to do. We need to list some ideas. We want to organize those ideas. We need to order them from general to specific. And last, we want to label. We want to create main and subheadings for those ideas. Okay, so you don't really need much to do an effective outline. In fact, all you really need is your ideas, of course, a piece of paper, and something to write with, right? So here, I've got my outline. I've got my topic at the top, my 3 main ideas with my details beneath. Now, each one of those 3 ideas could probably become its own paragraph, right? But I've also got this lovely program. If you don't want to use just paper and pencil, I've got this lovely program called Bubble that I've added to the Ning. There's a link for more information about it. I think it's a very easy to use, kind of clean way to make outlines. And I'd like to show you how to brainstorm using this application. So brainstorming helps us prepare a list of key ideas we might want to use in our writing. They don't have to be well written. We just want to get as many ideas on paper as we can. Okay? Once we have those ideas down, it's time to group our ideas. So it's a good idea to group our ideas by paragraphs we'd like to write them in. Here I've got 3 groups: people who benefit from webinars, the advantages of using webinars, and the challenges of using webinars. Once we've got things grouped, it's time to order the ideas in a way that will be best for the purpose of our assignment. We could do this by paragraph or by theme. So for this assignment, I'd like to start by focusing on the people who benefit from professional development webinars. After that, I do want to recognize some of the challenges of webinar use. Like, remember, noticing what someone who disagrees with our points would say is an important part of being persuasive. So my second paragraph might focus on this. And finally, I do want to end on a positive point, so I'll finish off with a paragraph about the advantages of using webinars. Notice that I've got each of my 3 topics clearly labeled here, so I'll know what to include in each of those paragraphs. All right, we're just about done with this presentation. Now that we know our audience, purpose, and tone, we've done enough research to strengthen our argument, and we've got a basic outline to structure our work. We need to find our content, okay? So because of context, the content we would share with our supervisor is perhaps quite different from what we would share with teachers that we hope would attend that event. We'll see an example on the next slide. But we could use examples, facts, statistics, or quotes. Here's an example right here. If here's our audience and our purpose, the content could be: one feature of webinars is that they can be accessed online, meaning that even teachers in remote or faraway places can access training materials at any time. Right? If you can think of some other content we could consider sharing, feel free to write some ideas in the chat box now. All right. We certainly covered a lot of material today. So let's review. Documentation is important in business writing because we should keep a record of our important communications. The written work we create to edit and revise something later is called a draft. Meeting minutes, circular emails, and proposals are different kinds of business writing. And also, because business writing is persuasive, it is usually clear and concise, and it uses active phrasing to engage the reader. I'd just like to leave you with some questions to ask yourself. Okay, so the first one you want to ask: what is the purpose of my writing? Who is my audience? What content would be appropriate for my audience now that I know my purpose? What research can I do to strengthen my writing? And would an outline help me? So that's it. Raise your hand if you're ready to write business assignments effectively now. All right, I'm loving all those hands. That's fabulous. You can put those hands down. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, or as we'd say in Kazakhstan, khrakmet. If you have any questions or want to discuss these ideas more with me and other people around the world, I'd love to see you in our post-webinar discussion on the Ning. There's a link for that discussion here. It'll be up after my second version of this presentation. So thank you again, khrakmet. I hope to see you on the Ning.
Thank you, Ben, for helping us explore effective tools and tips for effective business writing, in addition to a variety of documentation that business writers often encounter. I think we all have a better understanding of how to best implement this information in our classrooms and workplaces. We look forward to the post-webinar discussion and to exploring your NEE resource page. And we'd also like to thank you, our audience, for your participation today. We look forward to learning with you again in 2 weeks on November 15th as we learn about Cultural Competence in Business English with Lisa Mann. As a reminder, there will be a time change in the United States on November 5th from Daylight Savings Time to Standard Time. This 1-hour change may affect your local viewing time for webinar 7.6 on November 15th. Webinars will take place at 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so be sure to confirm your local start time in advance.